Welcome to the Front Porch here at First Unitarian Church of Dallas. I'm Reverend Kanter. I am so happy to reinvigorate the Front Porch Conversations. We've had so many good, important conversations here, what we call the virtual Front Porch. And today we have Dr. Brian Williams, member of our church and author. And why don't you welcome Dr. Brian? The Front Porch is really designed to have important conversations about impactful issues in our time and in our communities. And many of them are centered around race and reproductive justice. And today we have a conversation about Brian's book, which really hits on some intersections of many issues. And so welcome, Brian, and you can get the book here. Enter a Bang Books is over there selling them, and I'm sure Brian will sign them afterward. So, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Reverend.
So you and I stood in the narthex that Sunday after the shooting 7 years ago in July. I saw in you a kind of horror, a kind of shock. What was that moment like for you spiritually?
I was really lost during those early days after the shooting. This is, it's a day that's still with me. It's always in the back of my mind. I've never really let go of that shooting that day. And if you haven't heard the homily that Reverend Kanter gave that day, I would go listen to the podcast or YouTube. It would have been July 10th, I think. But you had me crying in the pews that day with your homily. So I really encourage you to go back and listen to that. But I was truly a lost soul. I could get up and go function in my day-to-day, and I think there's people in this audience that have experienced trauma. You know how you can flip a switch and go about your day-to-day business, but deep down, there's a storm churning. And that's how I felt. So you may not have known, if you didn't know me very well or talk to me, that what I was going through at the time.
And I'm guessing the book in some ways is part of the healing of those trauma. I mean, explain to us why that moment was traumatic. What was going on for you in that hospital in that moment with the violence in Dallas?
Right, so I just want to reframe that time period for those that may not know. This was July 7, 2016. We had the mass shooting of police officers here in Dallas. 14 police officers were shot. 7 were brought to the hospital where I was on call. I work as a trauma surgeon. Dealing with gun violence is my day-to-day vocation. And of those 7 that came to our hospital, 3 were critically injured, 3 died pretty quickly, and I felt guilty that I could not save these officers. I felt I let the officers down. I felt I left their Dallas Police Department down, their families, the city of Dallas. That was guilt I had carried for a long time after that shooting. But there's a moment where I had to do something I've done way too many times in my career. Is I had to change out of my bloodied scrubs, put on clean scrubs, button up my white coat, and walk into a room and talk to parents and tell them that they had lost their child to gun violence. And this is a grown man who was a police officer. And it was after that I found a quiet hall in the hallway, quiet hall in the hospital, and I fell to the ground and I was crying convulsively, like just convulsive, ugly crying, which is something I hadn't done for a long time. But also, separate from the incident, remember the summer of 2016. In the days prior, we had Alton Sterling and Philando Castile that were shot and killed. A month prior, we had the mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. This was the election between Trump and Clinton. So that year, there was just a lot going on. Racial justice, police brutality, gun violence, and that just came all to bear for me in that incident and afterwards. I thought, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, there's much more I felt I should be doing, but I couldn't describe what that was at the time.
James Baldwin said, "To defend oneself against fear is simply to ensure that one will one day be conquered by it. Fears must be faced." Was there a sense of fear? I mean, was that active in that moment for you?
I think fear's been active for much of my adult life.
Yeah.
A lot of the things I did were self-protective to protect me from people finding out about my inner self, right? I didn't want people to get too close to me. The closest person to me was my wife. But I think I used a lot of I can say this in reflecting on my life. I spent a lot of time, hyperachieving. I served in the Air Force, went to medical school, became a surgeon, did all these things. So I had all these credentials and plaques on my wall that said I'm doing great things for society. But we just want to be valued for who we are, right? And that's why I talk about racism in this book and how that's impacted me personally, but also what I see in society and how it impacts my patients, the trainees I try to teach how to become doctors. And I really wanted to address that because if we could just have an honest reckoning with how that impacts everything in our society, I think we can understand where we are now and move to a better future.
In your book, you're talking about gun violence as a public health issue. I'm also thinking about the intersections of race and gun violence, and what else are you seeing? Talk to us a little bit, deepen that conversation a little bit. How do these things intersect? What else is in that list? How did it manifest for you in moments in your work in the hospital?
I use gun violence as a hook to bring you into a world that you may not be familiar with. And it was I wanted to explore bigger issues. It's a memoir, it's rooted in storytelling. I talk about my life on the front lines of gun violence and just seeing too many young children die from gun violence, but also what that means as far as healthcare and the injustices I see in the hospital on a day-to-day basis, but make it more than just gun violence in healthcare. Explore the bigger issues in our society that are universal. Structural racism, injustice, and by looking through my eyes, I wanted you to not be just a spectator in the story. I wanted you to be in my body, like hearing my thoughts, seeing what I'm seeing, and then saying, okay, we're gonna go on this journey, and we're gonna learn. We're gonna talk about other much bigger issues, and at the end, I wanted it to be hopeful. I want it to be a inspirational, a call to action, but about healing, how we heal as individuals, as our communities, and as a nation. I mean, I had grand ambitions with the book to be a call to action for societal change.
Mm-hmm. So unpack some of that for us. What's the structural racism that you're seeing in the hospital? Talk to us like we don't know anything about that.
Sure. So, structural racism, that's a term that is, it's confusing to many. Some may just think it doesn't exist. It's easy for us to talk about interpersonal racism. Someone uses a racial slur directed towards me, which I've talked about in the book. But what about the structures that were put in place intentionally to segregate our society by race? I think we could talk about redlining and how certain neighborhoods were deemed unfavorable because they had majority black populations. But what does that mean for us today? This is the federal government saying that that neighborhood that has majority black population is unfavorable. Therefore, housing prices decline. Businesses do not invest there. What does that mean for public education, any other sort of public services, income, employment? And it impacts over time, right? Because now, today, those neighborhoods that were deemed unfavorable by the federal government generations ago now have the highest levels of poverty, late-stage cancer diagnoses, highest levels of endemic violence. So the structures that were put in place by the government to segregate us do have impact far beyond just income. It impacts your health, education, everything.
And health disparities, or access to health care, the prevalence of guns, prevalence of gun violence. You talk a little bit about this in the book, the gang violence, et cetera. In an op-ed you wrote, and I'll quote you, "No matter our social status, from gang member to doctors, black men are still serve as a mirror for people's fears, a screen on which to project one's anxiety and disgust, an endangered species navigating a world both hostile to and dependent upon our existence." I don't know if you remember writing that. It's probably in the book somewhere.
No, that was a good line.
Yeah, it was a good line.
That was a good one.
I thought so. But talk to us more about that. Talk to us about, your own experience of being the target of people's anxiety, disgust, and even violence in what you've experienced.
Yeah, I think the key line there is that American society is dependent on us as black men, but also hostile towards us. And what does that mean? In the book, I'm setting up a scene where I've just pronounced a teenage boy dead to gun violence. I've changed into clean clothes, and as I'm walking the hallway, I'm discussing that nobody knows what just happened. Not everybody knows what just happened. All they do is see this doctor walking down the hall. So if I'm walking down in bloodied scrubs and a stained white coat, that sends a message to people. But if I look pristine, despite having just pronounced a child dead, that will make a difference to some people. And with the decrease in black male doctors in medicine, I say we're an endangered species. We talk about endemic gun violence. 24 hours after this Front Porch Conversation, over half of the firearm homicides in this country will be young black men. But we extrapolate that to think that most people dying from gun violence are young black men, which is not true. And this, when I talk about the gun violence, how we have to unpack that there's different types of gun violence. We have suicides, intimate partner violence, the mass shootings, unintentional shootings, and the homicides. And most people in this country are dying from suicide, for firearms suicides, and those are elderly white men. So I wanted to bring in, race is discussed in different ways when we talk about gun violence, and a lot of times it's used as a trope to take away from the humanity of many of the patients that I treat on a day-to-day basis. And I talk about how, for me, as a black man, having cared for so many young black men, talked to so many families, and have myself lost family members to gun violence, how that impacted me over time.
I imagine some people might say, well, guns don't discriminate. Well, what would be your response to something like that?
I really work hard to avoid using bumper sticker slogans when we talk about something that causes so much needless death and suffering. I recognize that this is such a red hot button divisive issue, but in the book, I wanted to talk about it in a way that I don't know of anybody else that comes at it with the perspective I do. As a trauma surgeon who has spent their career dealing with this, as a military veteran who is trained on these weapons, as someone who's lost family members to gun violence, and as a black trauma surgeon who has to listen to the tropes about gun violence every day. And I wanted to share, we need to recognize the shared humanity that we all have. And that's one of the reasons that drew me to this church, is because of those sorts of values. Because, look at the audience, right? I might wake up and say, I'm in the wrong church today. But it's our shared values about creating justice and recognizing the humanity of everyone that has drew me to this church in the first place after my wife said, you're going to church. Stayed at the church and became a member. If we can get everyone to honor the humanity of everyone, how much better would this country be? And I'm hoping that at the end, when you read the book, that someone sees it that way and does something different the day after they finish the book.
Yeah, well, you can promote the church all you want. I'm totally with you on that. We'll go on the road. I don't remember the statistics, but you might know this, but we're like armed to the teeth in America, right? It's something like every household has more than 2 guns and something like. So, and not all guns and gun owners are negligent, obviously, right? But what do we do? I mean, how do you provide us any kind of hope around this? It seems to me, and many people I talk to, that just the sheer prevalence of firearms is going to be a problem for us. So how do you actually address guns, gun violence, gun ownership?
So we need to focus on what we can do to prevent needless death and suffering due to gun violence. And we can talk about some of the statistics. I mean, I'm a trauma surgeon.
Knows this.
Right, yeah, I'm a trauma surgeon, but I'm an academic surgeon. So, as a professor of surgery, I've studied this, I've done the research, I've written up on this. So some of the stats, there are more guns in this country than there are people. So firearms are concentrated in about 20% of the population owns 80% of the firearms. So there's a small group that owns, 10, 15, 20 weapons. And, some are family heirlooms that don't work. We understand all that, but it's really hard to get the final stats because there's such a resistance to collecting the information to keep us safe. Let's talk about the AR-15. Back when we had the assault weapons ban, they account for 5% of all firearm sales. Now it's 20% of all firearm sales. I trained on the M16 when I was in the Air Force. That is the military version of the AR-15. We knew that those were not toys. We put them in safe storage at the end of the day. Now they account for 20% of sales. So you have to think about the ease with which these weapons allow people to cause harm. Other stats. Let's talk about, 2/3 of all firearm deaths are suicides. I mentioned that most of those are elderly white men. So that's one type of gun violence we need to address with a different type of solution. Intimate partner violence. So a woman that's in a domestic abusive relationship, if there's a firearm present, she's 5 times more likely to be shot and killed by her abuser. If the woman is Black, 3 times more likely than white women to be shot and killed. So we can go on and on. The point is, when it comes to gun violence and gun policy, there are different types with different root causes, which require different solutions, but race is intertwined with all of these. And my point is, let's just talk about this so we can save lives, because I have seen too much, and there's an impossible task for us that work in trauma to try to deal with what's happening right now. We're all at risk, right? We are all at risk, no matter where you eat, work, worship, play. We're all at risk of us or someone we know being victimized due to guns.
So let's go back to the personal. Is there a story that really embodies your own pain or struggle? Maybe something in the book that you said it was story-based, so is there something in your life? You stood on the stage here and told us a story about being questioned for standing in front of your own apartment building, which is a fairly common experience for a Black man. But you're coming at this from a very different angle than most of the people in the room. Draw us out. Yeah. Where does the pain reside? What do you do with it? I'm your pastor talking to you now. I'm like asking you, how actually are you healing this in who you are?
I'll first say, when I spoke to the church, I probably should not have been out public speaking during that time. It was too early for me. I did a lot at the time, but I really wasn't thinking about, you can share but not overshare, but you need to be prepared to share. And I realized I touched a lot of people, but I tell you now that I was not in any condition to be doing that. I was just sharing myself without giving you a call to action. In the book, I filleted myself open because I felt it was necessary. The storytelling is what breeds connection, right? And I wanted to draw you into the story, not so that you had this voyeuristic view of my life, but I wanted to draw you in just so there's be some kind of universal connection. And if I get you into the story, then we can talk about these other bigger issues: racism, healthcare crisis, gun violence, social injustice. And then what are we going to do about it to make a difference? What role do each of us play to make a difference on earth today? We talk about this in this church, right? We're going to create justice today. In the book, I think one of the key scenes, there's many with my wife. Like, she's a character throughout the book, the voice of reason. But I think the themes where I talk about my therapist probably embody me opening up, because it's very uncomfortable for me to do that. As a doctor, you come to me for treatment. I don't go to you, so it's my annual physical exam. But that was different for me. But that opened up a lot of other wounds and things for me to address. I thought I was going in there just to talk about the trauma for the shooting. And she said, "Oh, that's what you think? Well, guess what? We're gonna talk about this, and this." And it became an ongoing process of healing.
So there's a sort of model there for us. Is there a call to action?
Oh, absolutely. The book is meant to be a call to action. The book is not about me. People think it's about me. It's not about gun violence either. It's about how we view ourselves as individuals, but as a society, and what sort of world do we want to leave for our children. Each of us can do something that will have tremendous impact. You may never even know it. You'll cross paths with someone and say something, make a difference in their lives, and you'll never know until much, much later. But right now, we have to address this persistent injustice within our society. We talk about healthcare in the book. Why do we continue to dichotomize people to those that deserve healthcare and those that do not? That should not we have so much money, so much ingenuity, so many people committed to health equity that should not happen. With gun violence, we worked together last year. People can come together to protect our communities and our children. Structural racism, we talk about that more openly now. We need to reckon with our history as a country, what we've done to people in the past, and how that has impact today. I'll just use one example, the GI Bill. There's probably many people in this audience that either had the GI Bill or someone in their family got the GI Bill, and they talk about how that transformed their lives, right? It lifted them out of poverty, brought them in the middle class, and the intergenerational wealth passed down has changed their children's lives and their grandchildren. If you don't know, the GI Bill was for World War II veterans, and it gave them assistance for housing assistance to buy houses, education to go to college. But those funds were denied to about 1 million Black service members who served honorably in the war, including my relatives. So they never got the benefit of that. And now, generations later, those that received government assistance back then who are doing well right now insist that those who are doing poorly right now do not deserve government assistance. Okay, so we need to understand the history of how we got to where we are and do what we can to uplift people, not oppress them.
Mm-hmm. There are some people here who work in hospitals. What should they be looking for? I mean, I walked through a hospital to go visit members of the church, but right. I don't think anything about it. I think there are the nurses, and there's the door, and so you walk through a hospital with a very different view, this book kind of view. What do you want us to do when we walk into that hospital? We walk through that door. What do you want us to be thinking about?
Well, getting your COVID booster, right, for one. I just want to put the word out there, take care of yourself. I now see the hospital much differently than I did when I first got into medicine. It was such excitement. I love being a trauma surgeon, I love being on call at 2 a.m. on Friday, just waiting for the pager to go off. I like being pulled in different directions all the time. That just really gets me excited. But also get to be with strangers on days that could be the worst days of their lives, right? You don't expect to wake up today and get in a car accident and have a traumatic brain injury, or get the phone call that your loved one is injured in the ICU. We get to comfort people and say, yes, it's bad now, but we're gonna be with you every step of the way. Now I see the hospital as a barometer of what's happening in the community around us, right? By the time someone gets to the hospital, it's too late, at least where I've worked. I've worked at safety net hospitals. So if you've been shot, if you come in and need an amputation because your diabetes is out of control, if you're in congestive heart failure because you could not afford the medicines, that's not something I can fix in the hospital, right? I can temporize it, but what's happening is outside the hospital. So my job is now a barometer of what's happening in the community around us. So now I'm thinking, like, what can I do to be part of intervening upstream? And that was the process that began for me after the shooting, because I realized, like, this is gonna keep on happening. It's gonna get worse. For me to do something different, I had to get outside the hospital. So now I look for ways to intervene in the community around with my experience and knowledge. In a perfect world, all the hospital beds would be empty, right? Because everyone is healthy and thriving in their communities. But this is a business where we need sick and injured people to keep things going. And that's something I'm reckoning with now, as what is my role as a doctor in this system that compensates me very well for that, but recognizing that it requires the suffering and poor health of people that I call friends and family.
All the hospital administrators in the audience just took a deep breath.
And said, we're never gonna ever hire you, Dr. Williams. You don't come applying for a job here.
I'm guessing the title of the book comes from that story of, the bodies keep coming down the river and you keep pulling them out and fixing them, and then someone says, let's go upstream and see.
Wow.
I
didn't think
I think you
that.
might have learned that here.
No,
I don't know if you
No, but that was not what I was thinking. But
Really?
No.
For real?
No, absolutely for real. Absolutely.
Oh, that's like a core story in sustainable change, right?
Oh my
The
gosh.
story is we keep pulling these out, right? And then somebody goes, well, why don't we go upstream and do something? Sounds to me like,
I gotta use that. No, here's
okay. Well, I'm glad to contribute.
Well, here's the real story behind the title. I had been through a couple of different titles with the editor and the publisher. And if you're traditionally published author, you don't always get the final say on the title. I was fortunate to have a lot of, we worked really well on this, but I accepted the fact that whatever title I chose, they're not going to accept. We went back and forth on 3 or 4 different titles. And really, just one day I was walking, I was either working out or walking my dogs. One of those moments where your mind is clear. And I was just thinking to myself, I was frustrated. I'm like, gosh, I'm going to work, and these bodies, they just keep coming. Like every time I'm on call, there was someone who was shot and dying from gun violence. The bodies just keep coming. The bodies keep coming. And I sent that, I said, that'd be a good title. I sent that to my editor. I think I had a 50-50 chance of getting it. And she's like, oh, I love this. She's like, well, I got to get past the publisher now. And she went and fought for it, and they took
Well,
that.
you can use my story.
Yeah. So which story is better? Let me know. I'll choose the one.
Well, the way we talk about it is, how do you make sustainable change?
Right.
And you do have to keep pulling people out of the river.
Right.
But you also have to go upstream. So we were talking, Reverend TJ and I were talking about the medical debt. Like we can pay down poor people's medical debt. But then we also have to go upstream and figure out, why are people getting into medical debt?
Right.
And that's what I thought that was, but I'm happy to be wrong too.
Right. And also that thought came after a night of, I had 18 or 19 gunshot victims come in within a 24-hour period of time, which is just, come on.
Yeah. And so we'll hold you in that, and we're, you're safe here. And, we hope you feel the love in this place. And thank you to Kathy Ann also for committing to this place with you, and we're so glad to have had this conversation. Will you thank Brian?
Thank you.